Called the meeting to order, and full committee hearing this morning on the national security challenges and U.S. military activity in North and South America, part of our ongoing series for this year to get ready for the FY21 budget cycle, basing this off of the budget that the President submitted for FY21. And our witnesses this morning are the Honorable Kenneth Rapuano, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Global Security, Admiral Craig C. Fowler, who is the Commander of the U.S. Southern Command, and General Terrence O'Shaughnessy, who is the Commander of U.S. Northern Command. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here this morning. We've discussed a number of the issues surrounding the overall defense budget. I think that's the thing we're most interested in, is how your piece fits into that. We've got the blank slate review, which is an attempt to sort of look at everything within DOD and build out a strategy based on what's to come, based primarily on the premise that we're still kind of stuck in the past a little bit in terms of where we're spending our money, where our priorities are, and we need to shift those priorities. Now, as always, when you're shifting priorities, it's very easy to focus on what the new priorities should be. The harder part is figuring out what you're going to do less of to balance that out. And we want to see how that strategy builds together. I understand that the blank slate review for your two commands, I think, is not yet done at any rate. So we're curious what you see in that, what you would say, here's what we need to do more, here's what we need to do less. How can we balance that out? Obviously, on the NORTHCOM side, Homeland Security is the #1 priority. So we're also particularly curious how you work with the Department of Homeland Security, what your responsibilities are, what their responsibilities are, how those things balance out. And there's considerable concern on the committee about the reprogramming request that most impacts these two commands that took $3.8 billion out of existing procurement to put it into further building the wall in the southern border. We're very concerned about how those priorities were set and the impact that it might have on the programs that were cut going forward. And it's worth noting also that there's still to come $3.6 billion, which is supposed to be taken out of MILCON. And that's in addition to the $3.6 billion that was taken last year. The impact that is going to have is profound. So we're concerned about that. We'd also be interested in various troop deployments to the southern border. And we know that typically these are requests from DHS that are supposed to be reimbursed. They have not been being reimbursed. Where do you see those requests going? And do you see you getting paid back for that? How do we balance the money on all of those issues? And also when it comes to Homeland Security, we are concerned about election interference, not just from Russia, but from a variety of different countries. As we head towards 2020, that's going to be a major concern. What are you doing to prepare for that? And then, most importantly, overarching all of this is the coronavirus outbreak that is going to have a huge impact on every community. If you watched the press conference yesterday, I think the smartest thing said is, if it hasn't impacted you yet, it will. Being from the state of Washington, it started there first, but it is by no means done. We've seen it spread quickly to New York yesterday, a major problem in Massachusetts. If you understand the epidemiology of this at all, it is going to put an enormous amount of pressure on our country. Now, primarily, that is not the responsibility of DOD, but certainly from a NORTHCOM perspective, we want to know what you could potentially do to contribute to meeting that threat. And from a SouthCom perspective, eventually, in all likelihood, it will be a factor in Latin America as well, and how it impacts that. So there are many challenges. I have them laid out in a more detailed way in my opening statement, which I'll submit for the record. With that, I'll turn it over to the ranking member, Mr. Thornberry, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me join in welcoming all of our witnesses here today. Like the other combatant commands, these two have a lot on their plate, and it is absolutely part of our responsibility to understand their budgetary needs and capabilities to meet their responsibilities. I'm struck by the fact, though, that with these two commands, as with others, extraneous events also get a vote. And so in SouthCom, you got to watch and deal with what happens in Venezuela. With NORTHCOM, as you mentioned, what's the military support for coronavirus, not only now, but how may that develop in the future? That's part of, I think, the specific challenging part of putting together a military budget. It's the other side, whatever the other side is, gets a vote. And I appreciate the challenges that both of these commanders have with a whole variety of issues, and we'll look forward to their answers to our questions. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rapuano. Or I'm assuming you're going first. Go ahead.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Thornberry, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the national security challenges faced by the United States and the Department of Defense actions to meet these challenges. I'm honored to be here in the company of General O'Shaughnessy, the commander of NORAD and U.S. Northern Command, and Admiral Fowler, the commander of U.S. Southern Command. I am the principal civilian policy advisor to the Secretary of Defense and the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy on a diverse range of issues, including homeland defense, cyber, space, countering weapons of mass destruction, mission assurance, and defense support to civil authorities. I'd like to emphasize 3 key points today. The first is that U.S. homeland is not a sanctuary. Rather, the homeland is a target in a complex global security environment. 2, China and Russia are using malign influence against the United States and our neighbors to undermine regional security. And lastly, we have taken action to ensure our nation and partners will prevail in this security environment. China and Russia are seeking capabilities to win below the threshold of armed conflict, to erode our national security and prosperity. They are attempting to undermine democratic governance, the rule of law, market-driven economies, and compliance with international rules and norms. Our competitors' capabilities, strategies, and actions underscore that we must anticipate multidimensional attacks on land, in the air, at sea, in space, and in cyberspace, targeted not just against our military forces, but against our critical infrastructure and our population, indeed our way of life at home and abroad. Should conflict arise, China and Russia hope to prevent the U.S. from intervening in the defense of our allies and partners. China's arsenal includes anti-satellite capabilities and advanced missile systems. China has also successfully tested hypersonic glide vehicles and claimed or created and militarized islands in the South China Sea in its efforts to coerce the U.S. and our allies and partners. Although Russia poses a different challenge, it too is developing anti-satellite capabilities, advanced missile, hypersonic glide vehicles, and advanced cyber capabilities. Rogue regimes such as North Korea, Iran, and Venezuela continue to pose threats to the United States and our allies and partners. Iran is investing significant resources on ballistic missile and space launch capabilities, which could lead to the development of ICBM systems. With support from Russia, Cuba, and China, the Maduro regime fails to provide Venezuelans with sufficient food and medicine. In response, most governments in the region have recognized interim President Juan Guaido as a legitimate leader of Venezuela. Despite our successes, terrorists, transnational criminal organizations, cyber hackers, and other malicious non-state actors threaten us with increasingly sophisticated capabilities. We are countering threats to our nation and our regional partners. Our actions will deny adversary benefits from aggression, impose costs on adversaries should they commit acts of aggression against the United States and our strategic interests. These efforts and our sustained regional engagement undermine our competitors' attempts to increase their influence near U.S. borders. The U.S. is strengthening its homeland missile defenses. DOD is developing a new interceptor to meet future threats. We are developing a new generation of advanced ground and space-based sensors to better detect, track, and discriminate enemy missile warheads. These capabilities will enhance our ability to deny our adversaries benefits from missile attack. Space systems underpin virtually every U.S. weapon system. China and Russia both seek to deny the U.S. and our allies and partners the advantages of space. The U.S. is responding to this threat by transforming our space enterprise and working closely with our allies and partners. The President's budget requests provides $18 billion for space programs, including $111 million to support the establishment of the new military service. The budget also funds the new Space Combatant Command, U.S. Space Command, and the Space Development Agency, which will accelerate and develop and fielding of military space systems. New presidential policy on cyberspace operations, as well as statutory authority, have enabled a proactive approach to competition in cyberspace. For example, Cyber Command engages in hunt-forward operations, defensive cyber teams operating globally at the invitation of our allies and partners. Working closely with our partners and informed by the whole-of-nation approach, similar to those framed by the Cyberspace Solarium Commission report issued today, we are maturing our concept of layered cyber deterrence. The Department is focused on preventing WMD proliferation globally and ensuring U.S. military forces are prepared to respond to WMD incidents and operate in contaminated environments. We are working with our federal partners and with other public and private sector partners to expand sharing of threat information that affects defense critical infrastructure and the defense industrial base. DOD is better prepared to assist civil authorities than at any other time in our nation's history. In 2019, DOD responded to 113 requests for assistance. So far in 2020, DOD has responded to 20 requests for assistance. While the Department's #1 priority is defense of the homeland, we are also enhancing the security of our allies and partners in the Western Hemisphere through several primary lines of effort. Working with partners to limit malign influence. The authoritarian model, offered by China and Russia uses economic, diplomatic, and security means to gain undue influence over the sovereign decisions of others. We are working with our allies and partners to counter this threat. Collaboration with our partners. We are advancing defense relationships with our self-funding partners while continuing support for our traditional training and equip programs focusing on strategic level cooperation. Sustaining defense cooperation through institution building. Our defense institution building is an increasingly important aspect of our efforts. We seek to share experiences and help them implement processes that magnify the effectiveness and sustainability of all other aspects of our cooperation. The Department of Defense takes a global view of the challenges facing the nation. We continue to improve our ability to defend the U.S. homeland in all domains and develop capabilities to defend the nation's interests globally. I appreciate the critical role Congress plays in ensuring the Department is prepared to compete, deter, and win in every contested domain, air, land, space, and cyberspace. I especially thank the men and women of the Department of Defense and their families for all that they do every day to keep our nation safe and secure. Thank you.
Thank you. General O'Shaughnessy.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Thornberry, and distinguished members of the committee, I'm truly honored to be here today as the Commander of U.S. Northern Command and North American Aerospace Defense Command. I'm also pleased to testify alongside my cousin, Admiral Craig Fowler, and Mr. Rapuano, both of whom I have great admiration for. And Chairman Smith, with your concurrence, I'd like to submit my written statement for the record. U.S. NORTHCOM and NORAD are charged with executing the National Defense Strategy's #1 objective, defend the homeland. Our adversaries have watched, learned, and invested to offset our strengths while exploiting our weaknesses. They have demonstrated patterns of behavior that indicate their capability, capacity, and intent to hold our homeland at risk below the nuclear threshold. The changing security environment makes it clear that the Arctic is no longer a fortress wall and the oceans are no longer protective moats. They are now avenues of approach to the homeland, which highlights the increase in adversary presence in the Arctic. To meet this challenge, we need to invest in a capable, persistent defense that can deter adversaries, protect critical infrastructure, enable power projection forward, and prevent homeland vulnerabilities from being exploited. To deter, detect, and defeat the threats arrayed against the homeland today, U.S. NORTHCOM and NORAD are transforming our commands and our way of thinking. We cannot defend the nation against 21st century threats with 20th century technology. We must be able to outpace our adversaries using a layered defense infused with the latest technology. To do so, and to secure our competitive advantage, we will continue to partner with our nation's defense and commercial industry to transform rapidly evolving scientific information into leading-edge digital age technology. And the Strategic Homeland Integrated Ecosystem for Layered Defense, or what we call SHIELD, is the architecture we need to defend our homeland against these advancing threats. As such, our layered defense needs to establish awareness in all domains, from below the oceans to the highest levels of space, including the unseen cyber domain, which are all at risk. We need a layered sensing grid with sensors in all domains which can detect and track threats from their point of origin long before approaching our sovereign territory. In other words, it requires the ability to identify and eliminate the archers before the arrows are released. We need an adaptive architecture for joint, all-domain command and control, capable of fusing a myriad of sensors across the globe into accurate, decision-quality threat information and at the speed of relevance for effective command and control. The Department of Defense, with the United States Air Force in the lead, is using the 2021 budget to further this capability of joint all-domain command and control. And lastly, we need the ability to deploy defeat mechanisms capable of neutralizing advanced weapon systems in order to defend our great homeland. We have put great effort into these areas, such as ballistic missile defense, and the need also exists to aggressively defeat additional threats, to include the ever-growing cyber threat and the cruise missile threat. And consistent with these concepts, we are changing how we are engaging with industry. We have shared our toughest challenges with our industry partners and have received an overwhelming response from not only traditional defense contractors, but also small and large commercial companies to leverage the military application of advancements we've seen in the commercial industry. We are harnessing emerging, existing, and rapidly evolving technology to plug into our shield, our architecture for homeland defense. However, more needs to be done to keep pace with the advancing threats to our homeland. We need to ensure we have a complete awareness of what is happening in and around our sovereign territory. We are mindful of the gravity of our mission and the trust you have placed in us. Aligned with the National Defense Strategy and capturing our sense of urgency, we at U.S. NORTHCOM and NORAD have declared 2020 as a year of Homeland Defense and are moving forward with the implementation of our shield. You and the committee should have great faith in the men and women at U.S. NORTHCOM and NORAD, because together we have the watch. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Thornberry, distinguished members, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm honored to be here with Secretary Rapuano and my friend, shipmate, and cousin, General O'Shaughnessy. We work very closely together to defend the homeland and ensure there is no seams between our regions, because we certainly know the bad guys don't pay attention to seams. Last year, General O'Shaughnessy and I traveled to Mexico City and Guatemala City to make that very point to our friends and neighbors. I'm joined by Ambassador Jean Maines, former U.S. Ambassador to El Salvador, and my civilian deputy, who brings with her a wealth of knowledge about our region and a deep understanding of China in our hemisphere. Western Hemisphere is our shared home. It's our neighborhood. We're connected to the nations here in every domain: sea, air, land, space, cyber, and most importantly, with our values. Over the last year, I've seen firsthand the opportunities and the challenges that impact the security of our hemisphere. And we've also understand the urgency with which we must react to those challenges. I've come to describe the challenges of a vicious circle of threats that deliberately erodes the stability and security in the region and our homeland. Vicious circles framed by systemic issues that face young democracies, like weak institutions, corruption, that are exploited by transnational criminal organizations, a $90 billion a year industry in this hemisphere. These institutions are often better funded than the security organizations they face, and external state actors that don't share our values, China, Russia, and Iran, and violent extremist organizations exploit this. They're trying to advance their own ends at the expense of U.S. and partner nation security. In fact, the aha moment for me this past year has been the extent to which China is aggressively pursuing their interests right here in our neighborhood. Why would China invest in critical infrastructure like deep-water ports and large swaths of coastline within a 2-hour flight from Miami? Why would China want to lock up total interest in a space station in this hemisphere? They certainly recognize the importance of this part of the world, and so must we. This vicious circle I described can be seen most acutely in the tragedy that is Venezuela. Human suffering in this once thriving democracy has driven nearly 5 million people to flee to neighboring countries like Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and more. These countries are absorbing the migrants and the strain that is placed on their health care, education, and security services. Colombia alone has spent over $2.5 billion in the last 2 years to support migrants. And while Russia, Cuba, and China prop up the illegitimate Maduro dictatorship, the democracies of the world are looking for a way to get the Venezuelan people what they deserve, a free and prosperous Venezuela. The best way to attack this vicious circle is as a team, Northcom, Southcom team, our interagency team, our whole-of-nation team, and with our partners. In this neighborhood, a little goes a long way, and our partners are willing to contribute, especially with U.S. encouragement, investment, and presence. In recognition of the complex threats challenging our neighborhood, there will be an increase in U.S. military presence in the hemisphere later this year. This will include an enhanced presence of ships, aircraft, and security forces to reassure our partners, improve U.S. and partner readiness and interoperability, and counter a range of threats to include illicit narco-terrorism. Last year, our partners played a critical role in 50% of our drug interdictions, up from 40% the year before. Getting our partners in the game by training and equipping them through security cooperation programs is exactly the right approach. These threats affect all of us here in our neighborhood, and we must tackle them together. Likewise, international military education training, IMET, is a small investment that yields long-term returns. It builds lasting, trusted relationships. As I speak, half our region's chiefs of defense are graduates of IMET. Along with exercises are a North Star. IMET, exercises, and security cooperation are the last programs we should consider cutting. Deployments like the United States Naval Ship Comfort show the best outstretched hand of America. The mission this year treated nearly 68,000 patients, extending our enduring promise as a trusted partner to the neighborhood. Thanks to the support of this committee, we also deployed a multi-mission support vessel, acronym MMSV, a contracted innovative ship that is supporting counter-drug detection and supporting our partners as a platform for their extended reach. The MSV is using intelligence produced by Joint Interagency Task Force South, JIATF South. JIATF South, located in Key West, our southernmost base in the continental United States, is a strategic and significant value for defending a wide range of threats to our national security. And we are working to take steps to improve the resiliency and the quality of life there in one of the highest cost regions in the nation. At our headquarters in Miami, we are also working to address the cost of living and housing concerns that create hardships for our families. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Thornberry, thank you for the opportunity today. The Southcom team appreciates the support of Congress and the trust you place in us. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much. I just have two questions. Admiral Fuller, can you give us an update on Venezuela? How are China and Russia potentially involved there? What are our interests there, and how is it impacting the region?
Maduro regime continues to cling to power and brutalize the population. The Human Rights Report this year listed a significant number of human rights abuses by the Maduro regime. Maduro stays in power because of the thousands of Cubans that protect and guard him and basically own the intelligence service in Venezuela. Russia in the numbers of hundreds right in there alongside, working to upgrade air defense systems, Russian special forces working to train and Maduro forces, and China to a lesser extent, but China is involved in particularly in some of the cyber areas, working to their interest. Unfortunately, this has allowed Maduro to cling to power and continue to brutalize the population. The narco traffickers have taken advantage of this, as well as ELN and FARC dissidents terrorists, and that instability, along with the migrants, has spawned instability out in the region. It's a credit to partners like the Colombia that they've handled it so well.
And that's not going to change anytime soon. Maduro is pretty solidly in power at this point, would be your estimation.
Maduro's isolated and continues to be isolated. International unity is there. We're continuing to work with Special Representative Elliot Abrams and State Department for the pressure campaign. Unfortunately, this transition can't happen soon enough for the brutalized population.
Thank you. General O'Shaughnessy, could you tell us what your missile defense needs are here for your command, where it's at, what your needs are in the short term?
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to highlight some of the work that we're doing and some of the work that we need support in doing. First, on the ballistic missile front, we have had some success now on next generation interceptor. Obviously, we would rather not be where we are relative to the RKV, redesigned kill vehicle, but now that we are, we made a decision to stop that program, start NGI. I'm happy to report just yesterday we had the Joint Requirements Oversight Council that successfully met to talk about how do we actually bring this capability to bear sooner. One of the things we have to make sure is that we understand is the threat continues to advance. And so whilst we may have delays in our program, the threat doesn't stop. And so as a result of the great work we've done with MDA, to include the work with R&E, and the ability to actually figure out what is the capability that we most need and how can we bring it to bear at the speed of relevance. And I think we've had some success there. Part of that is because we're working with industry to understand what are the long poles in the tent, that what are the most challenging things that are driving a long time acquisition program, and what are the things we can do for the trade space where time is now a factor of risk so that we can bring that into the discussion. I'm happy to report we've made progress on that front, and we're going to be able to bring this capability to bear sooner. And I look forward to the RFP ultimately being released and ultimately getting this capability. In the meantime, Chairman, it's also important we continue to pursue other means to include an underlayer. Critically important as we have our GBIs, which are a very capable system right now. We bring an underlayer such as bringing in SM-3-2As, which we're going to do a test in May, to ensure that it can defeat an ICBM threat. That brings tremendous capability and opportunity and potential to what we can bring to the homeland. Also looking at THAAD and how can we use THAAD for the protection of the homeland in ways that we haven't yet done. The combination of all those together with the work we're doing on our sensors, our radars, to bring the discrimination capability forward is going to allow us to maintain that advantage over our adversaries, so I can come to this committee and continue to tell you that we can defend against ballistic missile threats from a rogue nation.
Thank you. Mr. Thornberry.
Admiral, yesterday we had CENTCOM and AFRICOM before us, and one of the points I think everybody agreed on is great power competition occurs all over the world, including Africa, Middle East. You pointed out China's very active in the southern hemisphere. But you also made the point that cutting IMET and those sorts of training, exercises, providing military equipment doesn't seem to make much sense. That's my interpretation. Can you give us just a scale of how much money you spending in your AOR on things like exercises and joint training and that sort of thing, and then what happens from last year to this year?
The programs you mentioned, IMET, the education program, exercise program, security cooperation, are our pivotal programs. They're key. They are high return investment options. As we look at those programs, the IMET accounts have been solid with good support to increase IMET, and so we've asked for an increase. We may see a modest increase. $11 million is what we spent last year. That's making a difference. The exercise program and the security cooperation, they received cuts in the defense-wide review across the department. The joint exercise program received a 10% reduction, and the security cooperation, our main Department of Defense funded program, which is called 333, received approximately a 20% reduction that's being distributed amongst the combatant commands. For me, the impact over this coming year will be at around 20% reduction in our 333 money. And that reduction will mean we'll have to make some choices and have to defund some programs. And those programs that we will defund are likely ones that have made an impact, that have increased our partners' ability to do things like counter narcotics.
You mentioned IMET as $11 million. What's a ballpark for putting all those programs together in your AOR? Ballpark.
A ballpark for our needs in those three programs, probably around $130 million per year if you total it.
Okay, yeah, I think it's helpful for us just to have a perspective on that. General, some coronavirus folks are being housed at military bases. My understanding is some folks coming off this latest cruise ship, about 500 may go to Texas, 500 to Georgia or something like that. Explain to us how you or the department balances effect on military readiness and the health and safety of our military folks versus the need to have some isolation for people who are coming off cruise ships or maybe in other circumstances. How do you know when it hurts our military more than it should. Or I don't. How do you balance that? That's what I'm trying to get to.
Sure. Thank you for allowing me to highlight this. And let me first acknowledge that we are, in fact, housing some U.S. citizens as a result of the passenger ship challenge that we're faced with. And to me, this needs to be a whole-of-nation response. And so the Department of Defense is contributing to that whole-of-nation response to take care of our citizens. Specifically, the guidance we were given from the Secretary of Defense was the first priority is to ensure the safety of our military personnel and their families. The second priority we were given was to ensure that we maintain our readiness, our ability to perform our core mission set, because of course that can't be degraded. And then with that in mind, we look at what can we add to the whole nation response. In the particulars that you mentioned here, we do have folks right now at Travis, at Miramar, at Lackland, and at Dobbins. That is actually billeting rooms that we've provided. HHS has been providing the actual what we call wraparound services to that. In other words, we are not providing the military, the medical capability. We're not providing some of those contract services. They're actually being provided by HHS. What that allows us to do is we can provide them the rooms. We can maintain our ability to take care of our own families and our own military members and do the mission that we need to do. And I think it's a good balance of where we are right now. We can contribute, but no degradation to our ability to perform our mission, sir.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rapuano and General O'Shaughnessy, I gave you a heads up on this question, but I wanted to get for the record, we had a call last night with our governor in the state regarding the COVID-19 response in our state and the continued need for help. And but the question he had and wanted to pass on, if you give some direction on this, would be the ability or necessity of the of NORTHCOM, the DOD, to support response if we need a surge capacity for mobile hospital units. We're not making that request now, but in the event that we need to make that request, where does NORTHCOM or DOD fit into that role?
So the Department of Defense is working the whole of government process managed by the President's White House task force that is led by the Vice President, working very closely with CDC, HHS, DHS, and the other agencies involved. CDC, HHS, they are the lead for the domestic response. They are also the lead for the medical response. There's very significant capacity that is available to them, working with the state and locals as well. DHS and FEMA also have some levels of capability. The Department of Defense, for the force that we have, has relatively limited medical capacity, particularly with regard to the importance of force health protection for the force and their dependents and our other beneficiaries, but also the potential of contingency operations requiring additional medical capabilities on top of that. So we're very cognizant of that balance. When you look at the low-density, high-value elements such as ICU beds and ventilators, the Department of Defense does not have a large number of those. That's not typically military medicine type of capabilities. So there's not a surplus of capability there. So again, we're working very closely with CDC and HHS in terms of where we can best support and how we can limit the impact on defense readiness and capabilities.
All right, that's fair enough. We'll probably follow up with you later on. Again, we're trying to do our best to prepare, and we are in contact with CDC and HHS as well. But our Emergency Operations Center is active at Camp Murray in our state as well, so our local National Guard folks are helping out. Secretary Rapuano, I have a question I'm also chair of the Aviation Subcommittee. It's been a priority for me that the department, any department or agency with counter-UAS authority works hand in glove with the FAA in implementing its authority before deployment of counter-UAS technology at any location. So can you, since we gave the DOD some authorities the last couple of years on counter-UAS, what specific factors do you take into account before deploying counter-UAS equipment at any given location, given the use of civilian airspace in order to implement and operate counter-UAS?
Absolutely. I'll give an overview and then hand over to General O'Shaughnessy.
You got a minute and 41 seconds.
Okay. We work very closely with FAA. We do have authorities for counter-UAS domestically. Those authorities are limited in terms of we have to take into account undue risk to civil aviation, other activities that are not threatening to DOD facilities. So that is a process that is ongoing. And again, I'll just in limited time turn to General O'Shaughnessy to provide some additional specs.
Thanks.
So we have a very robust relationship with the FAA. Steve Dixon and I have met on multiple occasions to talk about these very issues, and our staffs work on almost daily basis with this, and as well as with the Department of Homeland Security, who plays an equally critical role within this. And I would highlight, though, we do have different perspectives. In some ways, the FAA is concerned about that compliant operator, right, and the safety of flight of that compliant operator, where we're more worried about the non-compliant operators and how do we separate the non-compliant and potentially threat from those that are doing things in accordance with the FAA rules. And so as we continue to work our way forward, this is a threat that we really have to find the right balance between safety for those to be able to operate and commercial businesses and whatnot that want to expand the use of USs, whilst at the same time maintaining our ability to defend our critical installations as well as the national critical infrastructure. I think that partnership is right. I think the authorities are right. I think we, from an investment standpoint, need to also look at those things that will allow both. And some of the systems we employ overseas aren't quite as useful here at home when we have to have the continual operation of airfields, commercial, to include the commercial ones, whilst being able to defend. So we need to invest continued within the commercial industry.
Great. I have some follow-up questions later, but thank you, and I'll yield back. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary and Admiral, you both in your opening statements and in your written statements reference China and Russia and their activities in South America. Mr. Secretary, you even talked of malign influence. What tools do you see that you have in the DOD portfolio, or what other things do we need to be doing to increase our influence in the area? Do we still have a competitive advantage? Are there areas where we're not competing that we should? What are you seeing, and advice would you give us?
Thank you for that important question. We still have the competitive advantage, but that advantage is eroding. Our competitive advantage remains in our education system. Our partners want to educate with us. China's seen that. Recent example, they offer 5-to-1. So if we're offering 1 slot to Carlisle, they've come in behind us to offer 5 to their version of Carlisle. Some of our partners are taking them up on it. It seems to be a nice vacation, but our quality, so we'll take our quality any day. Our partners want to exercise with us. Our partners want to do exchanges with us. And our partners want to be able to afford our gear, our equipment. It's the best built in America. Unfortunately, some of our partners have financial issues. China's figured that out. They've come in and started gifting large sums of gear, trucks, boats to partners. Recent conversation with a chief of defense in a small Caribbean nation. He gets around to it and he says, "Yep, they only gave me $20 million last year." And I looked at my cheat sheet, and it was about $1 million across all our assistance in the mill-to-mill. We don't need to outspend China. We just need to have enough and be present to continue that leverage and that access, presence, and influence that we can bring as reliable, trusted partners.
So I would just amplify Admiral Fowler's points. We have unique differentiators as the United States and our alliance system. We, unlike the Chinese or the Russians, have a very robust system of alliance allies and partners. We don't have to spend them dollar per dollar, but we do need to be resourcing these relationships and developing them in a manner that makes clear where the benefits are and over the long term, what is in the best interest of these nations. And it's very difficult sometimes when you look at the immediate laydown of what resources the Chinese are offering with maybe long-term payout in some areas. But it's increasingly, if you just review the inputs that are coming out from around the world, it's increasingly understood by nations that this is a predatory policy, particularly the Chinese approach, in terms of the loss leader up front and then the dependence on systems for which they do not have the same control. So again, this is just how we can most thoughtfully apply not the same amount of resources, but increased resources to address this important challenge.
General, you and I had the opportunity to talk yesterday of the huge investment that we're going to be undertaking. As we look to the National Defense Authorization this year, we have areas of space that we have to invest in, sensors, missile defense, even our nuclear deterrent is one that's going to require significant investment. You and I talked about your successors. If we don't make these investments, tell us what your concerns would be for your successors 10 years from now if we falter and don't modernize and invest in our systems.
Thank you for that opportunity to highlight these very important issues relative to our ability to defend our homeland. I'll start with our ballistic missile defense. We have a good program in place. We have a good plan in place. I think if we are able to execute that program as we have it designed with the underlayer, I think we'll continue to maintain that competitive advantage, both capacity and capability, to defend our nation against a rogue nation, whether that be a future development of capability in Iran or the current North Korean threat that we face. I think we often, though, have to think about the peer competitors that we have, Russia and China. And as we look at their actions and their activities and what they're investing in, we want to make sure we are able to stay ahead of them relative to our ability to defend our homeland. And it's not so much that we expect, for example, the Russians to be, wake up in the morning and find that they're invading the United States of America. That's not what we're saying. But there could be a regional crisis, for example, in Europe, that then, based on the nature of the capability they have, which would very quickly expand to a global fight. And so as we see that, we could very well find ourselves where they are trying to hold us at risk, whether it be with cruise missiles, whether it be with cyber, whether it be the myriad of capability that they have and they've been investing in. And so I think we have to look at this with clear eyes.
I should have said this up front. When we get to the end, I try to stop it. So if you could just wrap up quickly, John, this time has
Yes, sir.
expired.
We need to invest to maintain that competitive advantage in order to maintain our ability to defend ourselves against all threats in all domains.
Thank you. Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rapuano, General O'Shaughnessy, and Admiral Fowler. Thank you all for being here and your service to the country. Obviously, you all face unique challenges across the diplomatic, information, military, and obviously economic domains. And the Arctic, among one of them, has rapidly become a battleground in the great power competition that we talked about here today. Climate change is obviously already exacerbating these challenges as we see increasing hostilities in more navigable waterways. My question is, General O'Shaughnessy, do you agree that climate change is an aggregating factor in your theater?
Sure. What we are seeing is diminished ice, increased usability of some of the waterways. We see increased activity. We see some of the impacts of the result of that, for example, some erosion, and those are all things that we have to take into account. From my particular point of view, what I'm most concerned with is, as we do see our potential adversaries increasing their capability and capacity to take advantage of some of these more navigable waters, we also need to be able to operate in that environment. And so I have a renewed invigoration to make sure that we are able to operate in that Arctic environment.
So my question is, how is NORTHCOM factoring the implications for changing climate dynamics in its military planning?
So specifically what we're doing is maintaining our ability to operate, looking at all facets of it, whether it's our infrastructure, and make sure that we don't have impacts to our infrastructure as a result of any changes that we see. But also, again, because we see more activity there because of the environmental impacts that we're seeing, we also have to make sure we have the ability to operate there, that we have invest in things like communication, domain awareness, and infrastructure that will withstand those changes.
Thank you. Admiral Fowler, anything that you have to add, Mr. Rapuano?
The ability to rapidly respond to events, whether it's a weather event or an environmental event, a terrorist attack, transnational criminal organization, is important. So we continue to watch that closely and ensure that our exercise programs, our security cooperation programs, emphasize the partners' capacity to do that, because as we see in some of these massive hurricanes, no one nation has the ability to do it alone.
Okay. Thank you, Admiral. Mr. Rapuano, I want to, first of all, thank you on another topic for all the work that you've done on the the Solarium Commission over the past year. I was very proud to be a part of that commission as well, chaired by Senator King and Representative Gallagher, and very proud of the final product that's being released today. One of the major recommendations that we make in the report is strengthening CISA at Homeland Security to ensure that it has the authorities and resources that it needs to perform its civil defense mission. So, Secretary Rapuano, do you agree with the Solarium Commission that we need to strengthen CISA? And can you explain why the Department of Defense needs a strong partner at the Department of Homeland Security to protect the nation in cyberspace? And the last one, another key recommendation, is the importance of exercising. Secretary Rapuano and General O'Shaughnessy, feel free to chime in, of course. Can you detail how the department leads or participates in national level exercises to better prepare us to act in situations where DOD assets are called on to support civil authorities?
First, thank you very much for the question, Congressman Langevin. The Solarium Commission was a very fruitful and productive exercise from our perspective in the very frank, deliberate, in-depth discussions associated with the evolving, growing cyber threat. And I think one of the most critical outcomes from it was just strong coalescence, stronger emphatic understanding of the whole of government, whole of nation context for which we must rely on to be able to respond to growing cyber threats.
I think you just talked about CISA in particular.
I'm sorry?
And comment on CISA.
Specifically to CISA, CISA is the lead for DHS, which is the lead federal agency for responding and providing support to industry critical infrastructure. CISA, of course, needs to be resourced to perform that role. And we understand with the growing threat, there will be growing needs in terms of the resources required to effectively perform that mission. And we are very supportive of CISA being provided the appropriate resources to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here, for your service to our country. General O'Shaughnessy, in the President's budget, the Hawaii and Pacific radars were canceled. My first question is why? My second question is what kind of gaps does this create in coverage? And my third question is what are you going to do if the SPX is not at sea when a threat arises?
Sir, just for clarification, we view that as being postponed versus canceled. It is still a priority for us. There were some concerns relative to the executability of the funding, as our SecDef has commented about. I will say, from my perspective, it is with the SPX, we have the ability today to defend all of our defended area, to include Hawaii. What we would like to see, though, is this continue to be looked at to see how it fits into the overall system and our ability to execute that mission, to your point, with the SPX being obviously an at-sea platform and the risk inherently involved in that. With respect to our vantage point, clearly we see PACOM has put it in as one of their unfunded priorities, and we certainly applaud that. They also have regional considerations besides the broader GBI execution from the regional missile defense.
For example?
For example, as they look at the capability they have with the other radars, the TPY-2s, what they have at Guam, threats that they have in the shorter range threat, not necessarily ICBMs, that this would contribute to as well, beyond the NORTHCOM role in that specific mission set.
Okay. General, in your testimony, you say, quote, in order to reclaim our strategic advantage in the high north, it's critical that we improve our ability to detect and track surface vessels and the aircraft in our Arctic approaches and establish more reliable, secure communications for our joint force warfighters operating in the higher latitudes, close quote. What specific capabilities would you like to see us develop to counter the increasing threats from China and Russia? And is there something in particular they're working on together that concerns you?
There is, sir. First, let me start with, we have to start with domain awareness. We have to understand what's operating in the approaches to our sovereign airspace and territory, as well as within the confines of our sovereign territory. We saw just yesterday, you may have seen in the news, we had a Russian bomber 60 miles off the coast of Alaska operating in one of our ICEX exercises we have where our submarines actually pop up out of the ice. The camp established for there, they were loitering about 2,500 feet above that. And mind you, they were loitering with an F-22 and an F-18 on their wing when they did that. So we have to maintain the ability to be able to react appropriately, not just for a strategic messaging type event here, but potentially in the future to actually defeat any threats. It starts with domain awareness, and then you need ability to command and control, and to command and control, you have to be able to communicate. We have severe limitations to communicate in the Arctic. Above about 65 degrees, it becomes limited. Above about 70, it becomes severely limited, except for our more exquisite capabilities. I think one of the things we can leverage is the commercial technology that's out there. We see the proliferation of LEO, whether it be a company such as OneWeb, Starlink. We see amazing technology that's going to bring literally broadband connectivity, the same you would have in your home right now. You could actually establish within the Arctic very quickly in a matter of literally, a year or so. To me, that would actually fast forward our ability to operate within that very difficult, challenging battle space, is having the ability to communicate. And so we have as our number one unfunded priority list Arctic communications to leverage the commercial work and the proliferation of LEO that I think would be a game changer not only for the military but also for the civilian communities.
Great. Thank you very much. Admiral, in your testimony, you talk about South America's strategic location for space activity. Can you give us, and how China's pursuing that, can you give us some examples of what you mean by that?
The one space station China has virtual control over is what allowed China to land on the dark side of the moon.
Is that the one in Argentina?
Yes, sir. And that's an example. And so China sees this, as does Russia, and they're working to get their inroads into that area. Fortunately, we're pushing with countries, good partners like Brazil, to increase our access and our cooperation in space. And I think there's some real opportunity there with some of the agreements we've signed with Brazil over the last year, including this past Sunday. We signed a research development agreement with Brazil that was put together quite rapidly for types of agreements that will allow a broad range of technology and defense cooperation that could be included into space.
Yeah, it's a very important point I hope the committee takes note of, that China and Russia are both making great efforts to get toeholds in South and Central America, and we can't just ignore that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman, General, Admiral, Secretary. Thank you for being here. I want to talk a little bit more about the Arctic. I happened to be up at ICEX this weekend, and we all waved to the Russians as they flew over. I just thought they were there to see me, but apparently not. We often talk about the threat from Russia. Can you also talk about the recent activities from China and what they're doing and how or why we should be concerned?
Yes, sir. Thank you again for allowing me to highlight one of my most pressing concerns is really the Arctic and our ability to operate there and what we see our adversaries doing. Specifically to the China question, we see activity, for example, the Shuilong, which is one of their scientific vessels, that is probably the preliminary work they're doing to bring up military capability and capacity to operate in the Arctic. We see that China declare themselves as a near-Arctic state. We see the economic investment that they are doing, and we've seen in other areas of the world where that coercive economics has a very nefarious intent behind it.
But where specifically, if you could just point out the other nations they're investing in?
Well, obviously Russia. We see amazing activity on the Russian side, both in their installations that they are rapidly improving, as well as just their ability to operate in that environment with a very robust presence in exercises and training. And I think from our vantage point, we also need to ensure we have the ability to operate in that, what is, frankly, it's battle space. We need to be able to operate in that environment. I would use the analogy that we can deploy a force anywhere in the world. We've been very good at that in the United States of America, projecting power. You cannot deploy to the Arctic if you have not trained there, if you don't have the right kit, you don't have the right equipment, because it is such a harsh environment. And so we've been working closely with the services to increase the activity we see, that things like the training ranges at the ranges in Alaska, like the J Park range, continuing to invest in those so we have a playing field to go practice and scrimmage. We do see that as a principal avenue of approach that we need to be able to defend.
So the Bering Strait is one of the primary areas up there. We see that Russia is adding some more missile assets to their side. What concern and how are we countering those?
As you mentioned, the deployment of the missiles to that very critical navigation point that is a choke point for entry into the Arctic waters is absolutely critical. We need to have the ability to maintain our presence there, even in a contested environment. Those missiles can strike Alaska and our critical infrastructure within Alaska with very little indications and warning. Therefore, we have to have that persistent defense, that persistent domain awareness, the persistent command and control, and persistent ability to defend, not be able to just deploy it up there in a time of need, because we will not necessarily be able to get inside the actions of our adversaries. So we need to invest more in the Arctic.
Just to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk about the defense of the homeland with our lighter defense. You had talked earlier about what we've done to increase the capabilities. Hypersonics. How are we defending against the hypersonics, particularly if it was a submarine launch?
So a couple of points I'd make on hypersonics. First, we find that the hypersonics, for example, what's actually Russia has claimed, and we see in place already with the Vanguard missile, the hypersonic glide vehicle that has nuclear capability. Our biggest point on the nuclear capability is that we need to be able to give advanced warning. Because it flies in a much different trajectory, it does not, unlike a ballistic missile where you can get a radar on it and you know exactly where it's going. The hypersonic glide vehicle is unlike that. It has the energy to go to multiple areas within the United States, as an example. And so maintaining custody of that requires a different set of sensors to be able to do that. So we have to invest in our domain awareness, those sensors that can do the hypersonics. That's for the glide vehicle. For cruise missiles that we see, it shrinks the time. It shrinks the time you have to react. And so there is an investment that we need to continue to make to stay ahead of this threat that gives us, that we can operate at the speed of relevance relative to the threat that we see of these advancing cruise missiles.
In 26 seconds, talk about the time difference in what you can in this environment. How much does that cut down on the president's ability to make a decision?
It cuts down a lot of both. It's the speed of it and it's the energy that it has. It can go to multiple places, and that doesn't give you the ability to project that in a timely manner for our senior leadership. With our current capability, we need to invest.
I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. And I didn't realize you guys were cousins. Your grandparents must have been so proud of you all. That's pretty amazing, General Songacy, I wanted to start off talking about the F-15C fleet. At last year's posture hearing, you testified on the importance of modernizing the fleet for the homeland defense and the deteriorating status of the F-15C fleet and the urgency to replace these aircraft was the primary driver for the establishment of the F-15EX program. But this year's budget request reduced the number of F-15EX aircraft the Air Force planned to acquire from 18 to 12. So from a homeland defense perspective, is it still urgent to replace the F-15C fleet? And what are the vulnerabilities that we face if we don't quickly provide these units with capable and safe aircraft?
Ma'am, thank you for letting me highlight that. First, as you mentioned, the F-15C has been an incredibly important asset for us within the NORAD construct. The F-15EX, not only does it modernize it, and obviously an aging aircraft has maintenance reliability problems, but it just brings capability that are really applicable to us in the homeland defense business. Specifically, it can carry significantly more missiles, and so that one aircraft can actually have much more of effect relative to, for example, cruise missiles that you're trying to defend against. Second, it has increased radar capability, so with that capability allows you to see further out and be able to react to those lower radar cross-section threats. And the third, I'll use the example of what you just saw a couple days ago with the Russians flying over Alaska, is the long lengths that we have to fly, 750 miles from Elmendorf, as an example, before we were able to intercept that bomber. The F-15EX brings you that extended range, which allows us to get to the Archer, not just the arrows. In other words, we can get to the bombers before they actually launch those cruise missiles. So it really gives us flexibility. It gives us an incredible increase in capability. So I would just continue to advocate for the advancement of that F-15C and transitioning over to the F-15X as fast as possible.
Yeah. So what vulnerabilities do you have with seeing the reduction and the number of EXs that we're going to purchase?
Well, just a question of what gets, obviously there'll be a delay in purchasing results in a delay in fielding. And so now we will maintain the current fleet of F-15Cs for longer as we continue to advocate for
Is that possible? I mean, they're in really bad shape, aren't they? I mean, could you give us an update on the status of the things?
They are, but we have just an amazing group of maintainers that work incredibly hard. I mean, these aircraft, much like the F-16s, are just older aircraft, but our maintainers are phenomenal. Keep them in operational status, but we are putting a stress on the system, and so I would just continue to advocate for soonest replacement as soon as possible.
Thank you. Admiral Fowler, Southcom's unfunded priorities list requests funding for ISR capabilities for drug interdiction and counter-drug activities. So what are your current ISR capabilities, requirements, and shortfalls? And how will your mission be impacted if you're not provided with adequate ISR capabilities?
Well, the impact of the transnational criminal organizations and the drugs and illicit things that they bring here to the United States is it's a national security priority, and it's a travesty, and we clearly need to do more. One of our gaps is in intelligence, and ISR gives us some of our best intelligence in our maritime patrol aircraft, unmanned aircraft, and some shorter range aircraft. So we have gaps in all that. The Congress has been very good with an ISR transfer fund that has helped us fill those gaps. But still, we're trying to cover down on an area the size of the United States with a handful of assets. We also have gaps in ships, which we call those force packages, a helicopter, a ship, and its ability to search an area as well. And that's another significant gap. And I'd also illuminate the impact security cooperation funds have in this regime. For a modest investment, for example, in El Salvador Special Forces, we're able to extend the security envelope hundreds of miles out into the ocean.
Sure, it's a huge task. How concerned are you with the military's dependence on China to receive our pharmaceutical products from them? As you know, America does not make aspirin anymore. America does not make penicillin. 90% of the drugs that we take here in our country, pharmaceutical products, come from China. 80% of those components are China-based. And we see now they make all the syringes, they make our protective air mask, face mask, and all of these things, the vaccines, antibiotics, and pharmaceuticals that our military have come from China. With China being an existential threat, how concerned are you that they are our main source of medicine?
And I apologize, but that's going to have to be taken for the record at this point because the gentlelady's out of time. Mr. Carbajal is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all you three for being here. The political crisis in Venezuela has devastated the Venezuelan people and has led to an increase in illicit activities such as drug trafficking. In addition, Venezuelan refugees have fled the country and sought temporary residence in neighboring countries, especially Colombia. Secretary Rapuano, what is your assessment on how the Venezuelan crisis has impacted Colombia's security and stability, and how has the crisis affected regional stability in general?
Well, I certainly can say generally that there has been a significant impact in the region on a number of countries. So I think that this is an ongoing challenge. It's a reason why it remains a priority for the President and the administration. And we are continuing to increase the pressure so we can look for the appropriate changes in terms of the behaviors of the Venezuelan government.
Thank you. Admiral Fowler, an important aspect to strengthening regional security in Southcom is capacity building through sustained engagement. Can you provide the committee an update on ongoing capacity building efforts and also state what the biggest operational barriers are for expanding these partnerships?
The security cooperation programs that we invest in are long-term, high payoff investments for the security right here at home and our partners. So we're helping them build stronger institutions so they can buffer their democracies from the shocks of transnational criminal organizations and and frankly, to gain their positional advantage from the predatory practices of wannabe great powers like China and Russia. So it has a high impact, and it's not a large dollar amount. So we'll invest in programs, for example, to help a country set up an intelligence service from education to doctrine to a system so they can secure their own information, and then that allows them to share it with us. And this is our area that we focus on and prioritize on.
What are the barriers to being more effective and doing more of that?
So one of the barriers is stable funding. So what we found is when we don't have a budget that passes on time, we try to do a year's worth of security cooperation activities in 9 months or 8 months. And then at the end of the year, we often get scrutinized for our lack of good, solid execution as we rush to get the money obligated. So multi-year money would be one. Consistent funding levels would be another, and authorities associated with those consistent funding levels.
Thank you. General O'Shaughnessy, I know this has been touched on a bit, but I wanted to be a little bit more poignant and specific with you. This week, the committee has discussed quite extensively great powers competition across the areas of responsibility. With that, China and Russia continue to invest heavily in the Arctic, as the Arctic increasingly is viewed as an arena for geopolitical competition. In DOD's report to Congress on its Defense Arctic strategy, it states, Russia and China are challenging the rules-based order in the Arctic. Can you elaborate on that? Does the U.S. have sufficient strategy to counter Russian and Chinese efforts in the Arctic, with the underscoring of sufficient?
I think as a part of that answer is going to be highlighting the great work done to craft and deploy the 2019 DOD Arctic strategy. Significant change from the 2013 version thereof, with the real focus on of a secure and stable region in which the U.S. national security interests are safeguarded. The U.S. homeland is defended, so it recognizes that we must be in the Arctic to defend our homeland, and that nations work cooperatively to address the shared challenges. And so to your point in there, while we do see some cooperation, we are seeing more and more of this great power competition that has arrived in the Arctic. I'll use an example of what the Russians are doing with respect to the Northern Sea Route, where they are claiming that you need to use a Russian icebreaker, you need to use a Russian pilot on your vessel. That is not in accordance with the rules-based international order. And so I think we need to be able to have a presence, have the ability to operate there if we are going to be able to show by example exactly our ability to operate in these common navigable waters.
Do you feel we have sufficiency?
So what I would say is we need to invest in the Arctic. I've seen an increase in that activity, and we need to invest in order to operate there significantly.
So we're not where we want to be as of right now.
The trajectory is in the right direction, more to be done.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us. General O'Shaughnessy, I want to start with you. Recently, I have experienced and seen increased Russian activity off the East Coast, and that is of deep concern. I understand the Navy has stood up the Second Fleet as a counter to that increased Russian aggression, but I'm concerned that we're not adequately resourced to really address this the way we need to. You see the acquisition of sonobuoys being on the unfunded requirements list for the Navy. You see P-8 Poseidon production, our anti-submarine warfare aircraft, that production being truncated. You also see now a delay in the MQ-4 Triton program. All of those things cause concern to me. The Navy only has 5 long-range SIRTAS vessels, which are critical in being able to deter and detect activity in the North Atlantic. We also see, too, that we're on the opposite track on our submarine fleet, our attack submarines, where we are going to go from a high of 52 today to a low of 41 by 2028 in the Virginia-class submarine fleet. All of those things appear to me to be going in the opposite direction as we see increased Russian activity and aggression on the East Coast. Give me your perspective on the full scope of that Russian aggression, and are we properly resourced and positioned to be able to counter what we see at least in the past 2 years, is pretty significant and continued presence of the Russian fleet in the East Coast off the United States.
Thank you, sir, for highlighting this. This is something that I think over time we have been able to have the luxury of not having threats to the homeland that are literally right off of our doorstep. That environment is rapidly changing and has changed. We are correspondingly investing in our ability to do that, but as of yet, we have not yet achieved the capability and capacity that we need to maintain that competitive advantage. To your specific points, and you highlighted exactly the list that I would go down ultimately, but I think the ability to have that domain awareness. When I say domain awareness, it's not just radars that can see the air domain. It's from the undersea, the surface vessels, and all the way up. And so that investment not only in the SIRTAS capability, but also in the IUSS, the ability to have the sensors under the water that can detect those in a persistent manner are critically important. I think continued investment, the sonar buoys you mentioned, we employed a lot of them this last little bit without getting into operational details. And I actually got to go down and talk to the crews specifically that were doing some of those mission sets. And the good news is they did not feel that they needed to be limited in their ability to operate as a result of the current status. But we have to be mindful of that, go in the future, invest in that capability, that attributable capability that we need to have at our disposal at any time. The broader point I would make to what you're saying is these threats that used to be global in other areas, they are now here on our doorsteps, and we must be prepared to defend against them.
Do you think that the current budget request is a reasonable response to this increased Russian aggression?
Sure. We've worked really hard with the United States Navy on this, and I would highlight the fact that they have put significant investment into the homeland defense architecture and the ability to be able to defend ourselves here at home. We need to continue that resourcing, though. It can't be a 1 year or 2 years and be done. This is a continued investment that we need to make. Things besides the resources that you think about in a budget, but as you mentioned, Second Fleet, that even just having our ships operate out there in that environment that used to be just training, now is actually operational level commitment.
In addition to that, we also see, I think, continued threats to our transoceanic cables. Those are continual efforts that I think our adversaries look to exploit. And as we went through last year's back and forth in the Congress, we did put together a cable ship security program that says that we should have some ships available if perchance there is an activity against those transoceanic cables. My question would be, what else should we be doing going forward? Is that threat a constant threat? Is it an increasing threat? What are the necessary resources to make sure that we are addressing that threat?
I would quickly just say that, yes, that is a consistent threat, and that's the way we have to look at it. We can't look at it as something we would just apply during crisis. This is something with so much of our communications going through those undersea cables, we must do it in a persistent way.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Following on some of the conversations that we've had, I want to talk about Admiral Fowler, the National Guard and the role that they play, especially in your AOR. I know that they played a critical role over this long period of the past 20 years of conflict or so, but I know that one of our Guard units in Oklahoma is particularly active along the Panama Canal, and I'd like for you to speak about the role that the National Guard plays and units like the 137th play in your area of responsibility around the Panama Canal for a moment, please.
The state partnership program with our National Guard is one of our main efforts to build partner capacity and readiness for our Guard units. It has the advantage of having the habitual relationship over time, over many years, that builds trust. And our investments in that program are good investments for the security here at home and our partners. The Oklahoma Guard currently is deployed to Colombia with 2 MC-12s. These are deployed in partnership with Special Operations Command. We're supporting our Colombian partners who are in a tough fight with ISR. And that ISR has directly from those 2 units, and I went down and visited them, and it's a real economy effort. There's about 40 of the guardsmen there. They're motivated, and that has directly resulted in the Colombians being able to action ELN, FARC dissidents, terrorists, and to get after narco traffic, significantly making a huge impact, those MC-12s and Oklahoma Guard.
Speaking of ISR and following up on some of Ms. Hartzler's, Congresswoman Hartzler's questions earlier, with the proposed change in the MC-12 and the needs for ISR in drug interdiction and the work in South America, in this transition, do you see the ability to continue the ISR that you need?
Those having the ability to assist our partners develop their own ISR capabilities, it means we've got to be engaged, present, provide our leadership, and these types of deployments are extremely helpful to do that. And I would recommend continuing these high payoff, low cost efforts, such as the MC-12s that are with the Guard unit. As I understand it, those are slated to be taken out of service with upcoming budgets. I think they're making the case right now as to why it makes a difference, both for the drugs that are taken off the streets in Oklahoma and the rest of our states, and to take that money out of the hand of narco-terrorists in our partners' countries.
So you see that as a valuable mission?
That's extremely valuable asset to have the ISR in theater with our partners.
Thank you. And Admiral Fowler, one more area that I want to discuss with you, and that following on about the funding for narco-terrorism and the impact. The 333 Funding Authority is designed, of course, to support programs that provide training and equipment to foreign countries to build capacity of partner nations. I know we've touched on this in several ways, but what challenges do you see with the 333 funding process?
Well, clearly there's never enough money to do all the things the department wants to do, and we've got to make tough choices. The Secretary of Defense has been clear about that, and we're all in to work National Defense Strategy Line of Effort 3, which means we've got to account for every dollar of money we spend, an hour of our time. So as we look forward, this security cooperation funds have got to be applied in a manner that directly impacts the future challenges. And so having a balance of these funds to look at the global fight is really important. The overall funds is about $1.1 billion, so it's a significant amount of money. Applying that globally is really important as we leverage for the future. This is long-term payoffs, and getting that right is so important to us, and our partners depend on it. It's paying dividends here at home.
Thank you very much, Admiral Fowler. I am almost out of time, so I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Fowler, I think you've been very kind with your comments. I think the fact of the matter is DOD gives you what's left over of ISR after they fulfill the other requests throughout the various operating regions. And I want to just ask all of you this very quickly, just yes or no. Should defending the homeland include defending American citizens from narco-terrorists and transnational criminal organizations? Yes or no? What's that? It's not a trick question. I'll assume, all right, yes.
Absolutely, Congressman.
Okay.
It's a threat to our homeland, and the national security
Absolutely.
strategy recognizes it as such.
Absolutely. So, Southcom's total operating budget for fiscal year 20 is $1.2 billion. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
So to put that in perspective, we spent 14 times that in Afghanistan.
I'm sure it's a higher number. I don't know.
We spent 14 times that in Afghanistan. We have had 32 deaths in the United States from the coronavirus this year. Not to diminish that, but this Congress, virtually all of us, walked out on the floor the other day and appropriated over $8 billion for the coronavirus, which has killed 32 people so far in the United States. Again, not diminishing that, but we lost 150 Americans yesterday to drug overdoses. We'll lose over 5,000 a month to drug overdoses that are the end result of Congress and quite honestly, administrations not prioritizing defending the homeland from narco-terrorists and transnational criminal organizations. Again, I mean, so your total operating budget is $1.2 billion. $75 million of your budget is for theater security cooperation. General, that's the cost That's less than one F-35. That's less than the cost of one F-35. In your written testimony, and this is what concerns me the most, you stated that you were unable to act on 91% of the shipments, despite having actionable intelligence and authority that a shipment of narcotics was coming into the United States. How much additional money would be needed to lower this figure to 10%?
Yeah, we've taken a hard look at that. And as I've said in my opening statement, as a result of illuminating those gaps, we have received support from the Department of Defense and clearly from the President's direction to increase our presence to address the range of threats. It's an area the size of the United States, so the number of assets required to do that is significant. We're talking in the dozens of ships and force packages, which is why it's so important, sir, to get the partners in the game. Getting the partners enabled. They're at 50% of the interdictions right now with our continued leadership, and sometimes it's just time and some resources, and our whole of nation effort here, working with state INL and our DEA, we want to get those partners into 60% this year.
So my concern with, as a whole, more Americans are dying from the actions of the transnational criminal organizations and violent extremist organizations in the Western Hemisphere than any other identifiable source. That number of 90%, the 90% range, has not changed. As much money as we have given to the DOD and increased funding over the last 10 years, which has predominantly been the end result of this committee, we're still allowing 90% of the actionable items to come through. And so all of the additional money we've given has been transferred to other priorities and not to the priority that is resulting in more deaths than any other area. And I'm almost out of time, but I do hope the other members will go to Southcom and look at the small things that could be done for a very small price that would actually take significant amounts of drugs off the streets of America. And as the chairman said, if it hasn't impacted you yet, and he was speaking of the coronavirus, it will, and I agree with him on that. But I'll promise you this, if you haven't been to a funeral of somebody who died in your neighborhood from a drug overdose, you're the lucky one. And I bet you that you will get to go over the next couple of years. Thank you for your work.
And certainly I think the gentleman's correct on the statistics. I would point out we need to work on the supply, but at the end of the day, it's a demand problem. What drives the money, what drives, and you know, in Southcom and Northcom, what they do to get drugs into this country boggles the mind. I mean, they make submarines. I believe a fake shark was once used to do this. We just heard about the tunnels that are going under the wall that would make Hamas proud in terms of what they've built there. And they put ladders over the top. And why? Because of the money. There's a lot of money to be made by selling drugs to Americans who demand them. So we need to really, if that demand went away, there wouldn't be a problem. And I really feel in this country we do not focus enough on why is the demand there and what can we do to reduce it. If the market dried up, your guys' job would be a lot easier. So we need to work on both. With that, I'll yield to Mr. Gold.
Thank you, General O'Shaughnessy. I wanted to ask kind of a follow-up to a lot of questions you got from people earlier about your operations in the Arctic with Russia and China building their presence out there. Recently, I was reading a little bit of a conference where Jim Webster from NAVSEA in the American Society of Naval Engineers was talking about some of the struggles with hulls and the ability to break through ice and navigate up there. Obviously, we need more Coast Guard icebreakers and such, but he did make note that the destroyer, the DDG-51's hull performs fairly well relative to a lot of other platforms that you might have up in that region. So just a more specific question about the DDG as you're considering deterrence and the role and requirement for freedom of the seas that you have up in that region as a mission. Are you thinking about what kind of consideration are you giving to leveraging the capabilities coming online in FY23 with the Flight 3 DDG, particularly where it's going to have the anti-air ballistic missile defense capabilities added to it? Is that something that you're looking to use up in that region?
Well, first, let me start with the Polar Security Cutter. Obviously, not within the Department of Defense, but our partners within the Coast Guard need this capability. They need it soonest, and they need it robustly. And so without that ice-breaking capability, the other the surface vessels will not be able to operate. That said, our DDGs have proven to be amazing platforms all over the globe. They will continue to do so in those regions, especially as we see diminishing ice, but they are not icebreakers, and so therefore they need the appropriate operating environment. I applaud the Navy's efforts over the last several years of really increasing their ventures into the high north, the Arctic, to actually get the crews out there, and they haven't been for some period of time, to experience it, learn those lessons, and make sure we have the ability to operate in that environment. And so I applaud CNO, and I applaud all of the operators for going up there, whether it be the Harry S. Truman and others that we've seen. And I'm excited to see, as we look into the future, they are continuing that level of effort, and as are some of the other services, to be able to operate in the Arctic, because if you're not actually doing it, you will not be prepared to operate in that environment.
Well, I appreciate that. Just throwing out there, one of the things that I was reading in this particular write-up as lessons learned was something about just old school tactics. I don't know that I quite understand this as a Marine that didn't spend much time on a Navy ship, but they were talking about bringing baseball caps to combat ice growing on ships. Admiral Fowler, I don't know, maybe that's something you've heard. But I thought it was an unusual lesson learned from training up there. So it's important to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Golden.